And but I distinctly remember reaching across the lane line to shake the hand of the woman who had beaten me.
Today we have the pleasure of introducing you, Ann Stone.
Your job as a leader is to serve those who are working on the business.
A former C-suite executive at Coca-Cola, Church's Chicken, and Dairy Queen.
Some of my employees are like, oh my God.
Ann has been a trailblazer in marketing and business strategy, transforming the industries she's worked in. We often glorify successes in our society, but we don't think about the costs they come with.
There was probably a good 10-year period where I hardly worked out at all.
Ann, thank you so much for coming today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
One question we'd love to start off of is we believe that someone's earliest context is so fundamental into shaping their perspectives and their views on the world. I'm going to ask you, what were those key moments in your childhood growing up that formed your perspective today?
Well, the first answer I have is remember just how long ago my childhood was. So that's, it's got to be put into context. I grew up in a company town in a place called Midland, Michigan, which is the home of Dow Chemical Company. And that probably had an enormous influence as I think back at it, in terms of my desire to be in business, my fascination with business. My dad would sometimes let me go into work with him on the weekends. There were certain cycles of budgeting. He worked a lot in kind of financial analysis to put a bucket into it. And so he would let me come in and, it seemed like this magical place, to be honest. There were lots of humans. They got lots of things done. Decisions were made. Analysis was done. I was just fascinated by the whole process. So for me to be now an advocate of how I think business can at a very high level can change the world in ways that are both productive and not, and we need to be aware of that. It probably stems a lot from that experience. So that's probably one of the things. Another thing that comes to mind, but I don't know that this is as useful, is, or maybe it's more important, depends on where you want to go with this, is I was alive in the riots in the United States in 1968. Which were racially motivated. A bunch of Black humans correctly said, our life is terrible, and most of you white people are in some way part of the problem. Get over it, right? Give us better opportunities. And I remember as I probably would have been 6 or 7, and it made so much sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to you to realize, but when somebody says, my circumstances are really bad, it shouldn't be really bad, fix it, right? And you folks you're in control, and we want to be part of the people making the change, but you've got to make some changes. It made so much sense. And yet, in so many sad ways, the world has changed very little from 1968. And if you had told me, or if you had done a podcast, because they existed with me when I was, I don't know, in my early teens or something, would I have ever imagined that we would still have to have conversations about women earn less money, and women who are of African descent earn even less money, and women who are Latinx are even less, just as an example across one spectrum? I would have been dumbfounded. How is this possible, right? And so that's, I wish I could say I had done more to try to change things. I have very small examples of things that I did, and frankly, some that I screwed up, not from malintent, but because we oftentimes trip over our own feet trying to do the right thing. But those are a couple of things. So grew up in a business environment, which not everyone has the opportunity to do. And I grew up during the time during which my birth country was undergoing significant change. And I thought, great, now we're going to fix this and move on. And we didn't fix it, and we're not moving on.
You said you would have changed some things if you look back. What are some of those things you would have changed being in executive positions at some of the biggest companies in the world?
Well, on the one hand, a lot of things happened the way they should have. There were diverse candidate slates. We were bringing in so many different people. I worked at companies where, frankly, that would have been 7 or 8 years during my career. My supervisors were either an African American man or a woman. And so I was kind of part of that first wave of diversity. Um, I think the bigger issue, and it takes me actually to education, is pushing, being part of, I don't know what the right words are. And I look at you somewhat helplessly because I'm not sure how I would go back and tell myself how to do this. But were the companies of this, well, I didn't start working until the mid 80s. So, in the 80s, 90s, and aughts, were we as leaders doing as much as we could to make sure that every group had an opportunity to get the kind of education that would allow them to move seamlessly and easily into leadership positions? And, I say it that way because my answer is I don't think any of us were. It doesn't mean I don't feel responsible for it, but I don't think there was anyone doing a really good job. And in fact, some of the companies that did just amazing things. I was part of the Pepsi-Cola company for quite some time. So PepsiCo, the company. And that's where I had 2 African American supervisors in a row. And there was this massive initiative to bring in diverse talent. And these are incredibly smart humans, right? One went on to run a major chain. The other one is currently the chief marketing officer of a very successful grocery chain in the United States. So, these are humans who just kicked it out of the park. But then it's who came after them, right? I'm just not sure that next wave happened the way it should have. And again, I'm not sure I know what to say that could have been done differently. But damn, I wish I would have thought of it, and I wish that I could have been doing more things. Now, it's really easy to look in the rearview mirror and say, "Gosh, I could have done this or should have done this." Let me flip it around and say, I'm also really proud of the fact that there are people from all different walks of life, sexual orientations, gender identifications, and all sorts of things that I have stayed in touch with, who validate that at single points in time, good things were happening. Okay. Because not everyone in my, friend circle or LinkedIn connections are going to be people who share my heritage or my background. But I do wonder what were we all missing during that time frame where we didn't get that. I've always assumed it's education, but I don't even know what it is. How did we not get that next generation in?
Right. And carrying on with like your personal and professional growth, we know you were a national collegiate swimmer before. Do you feel like that has given you discipline and all those necessary kind of values to become the person you are today?
Without a doubt. You probably know this. Swimming's a pretty brutal sport. It's 2-a-days. It's weight rooms. It's and unlike so many other sports, it's not social. Your face is in the water the whole time, so you're not talking to anyone, right? And so you have to have a lot of mental discipline just to be able to go through the tedium of lap after lap after lap of swimming. And so absolutely it had an impact. But it also, interestingly enough, I think it taught me how to fail. There's lots of times where I lost races. I wasn't gifted, right? Okay, so it's not like you're looking at someone. I didn't win that many races, to be brutally candid. But one in particular that stands out is I went to an undergraduate school in Michigan, and we had like anybody does, right? There's a group of colleges that you swim against a lot, right? So it's their championship, and we're at that championship. And I was touched out by a hundredth of a second by somebody else, right? So you could be the champion. And there's bragging rights that come with that, right? I'm the Midwestern United States Division III best, and I don't even remember the event. My guess would be it's either free or back, but I don't even remember. And but I distinctly remember reaching across the lane line to shake the hand of the woman who had beaten me. And there's something about sports where you dig in individually and you've put a lot of work in, and yet you have to be gracious in that moment. At least I believe you should be, and I think most swimmers feel that way. You have to acknowledge the success the other person's experiencing, even as you're feeling disappointed that you're in second place or whatever place you got. And the number of times in my career where that acceptance of I got touched out was helpful. When somebody gets promoted, when somebody leaves the company for an outstanding job, when somebody those are the two that most likely come to mind. I mean, the ability to draw into yourself and say, I gave it my best, hopefully you did, and I pushed down a direction, and then to be able to put your hand out and say congratulations to somebody else. Boy, I've used that skill an enormous amount in my career.
Seems like there's a correlation there between sportsmanship and humbleness. When you started your career and when you ended it professionally, how has your view on leadership changed?
Well, again, and I'm going to show my age on this one. A lot of my learning, particularly in my MBA, about what made a great leader, who was a great leader, even who we looked up to in terms of great leaders, were usually white men who had some level of charisma and well-spoken. And they were in Fortune magazine or Forbes magazine or the Wall Street Journal. Those were the three major channels to make yourself be wowed. And you almost tried to model yourself on them because that those were the people that the popular press was saying were the successful managers, and there was often data to back them up. During my MBA is when Tom Peters released, and I cannot remember the name of his co-author, but In Search of Excellence. And that was a pretty seminal book. It was really kind of the first time where data collected was used to identify what a good company looked like, what a good leader within a company looked like. And it kind of spawned, I'm sure both of these authors would disagree with me, but nonetheless, it kind of spawned, oh man, I can see his face. The gentleman, isn't this funny? You can tell I'm color oriented. It's a red book when it first came out. And it's 3 words, and he's the reclusive dude out of Boulder. Anyway, there was a feeling that you could dig into the data, and yet the data was all about white guys. And so if you can imagine this, in my first couple of years working at SC Johnson, a great company, I had little bow ties that I wore because ties were a sign of professionalism. So you would wear a jacket, and then as a woman, you had to have nylons, then you had to have a slip, then you had to have a skirt, and then of course nylons would often run, so you had about 5 pairs in your desk drawer because my God, this is going to run, and that was a horrible thing. And you were in pumps, which are just horrible for your feet. All sorts of things that I've rejected so completely. And so leaders were people who weren't like me, and you had to kind of make it up from there. And that made it more challenging, I think. So I don't think there were a lot of great role models. I don't think I look back and go, oh, there was this great class or there was this great role model. No, None of it. It was a lot more of making it up as you go along. Now, towards the end of my career, I don't know that I buy everything of servant leadership, but I do believe the concept of servant leadership has a lot to recommend it. Your job as a leader is to serve those who are working on the business, right? And that means you break down barriers. And actually, in a weird way, one of my proudest moments as a leader was I had left the Coca-Cola company. I had resigned. I was just not on board with something they were doing, and I'm fine with that choice, and it's all good. But I walked out, and one of my former employees phoned me up and said, "I got to tell you something. I had no clue how much you protected us." And I said, "Really? Talk to me." "Oh my God, there's these memos and they're useless and they don't tell us anything." And then there's this wild person and was naming people, of course, that I would never repeat. But my job in that case was to create almost a code of silence so that my team members could accomplish what we had agreed was the right thing to happen. And it was my job to make sure that that collective effort was sold upwards in a way that showed this team to be successful, to show the individuals to be successful, and to create almost this half sphere over us to protect us from all of the BS that happens in corporate environments. And it was so fulfilling for me, terrible in a certain sense, but so fulfilling that some of my employees were like, "Oh my God, you had created this environment where we were feeling successful, engaged, invested in each other's success. And we didn't hear all of this noise, which made us more successful." So there you go.
Yeah, so when you're progressing with your career, we noticed that you jumped from like an entry position really quick to the top level C-suite executive positions. Can you kind of walk us through how you were able to make the transition so quickly?
Yeah, the funny thing is if you were to ask SC Johnson, they would laugh. And I was not on a success track at SC Johnson. And I'm happy to say that. I'm also happy to say this. Please don't, whoever watches this, whoever your viewership is, this is not pride. This is just literally a sense of gratitude that I really want to communicate with. Is the gentleman who ended up running SC Johnson for many years, which is one of the 5 largest family-owned companies in the world, is not a member of the family and is someone I got an email from as recently as a couple weeks ago. We're still in touch. And I resigned to him and we cried together when I left, but it was the right thing. So my first answer is you have to know sooner than I did when you're not a good fit. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad worker. It doesn't even mean that the work you're doing is wrong. It just means that how you go about that isn't a great fit. And the reality is as much as we like to be blind to all of the biases that come into leadership, the reality is that people gravitate to promote and mentor people who they feel will be successful. And so I spent 8 years at my first company, and I should have spent 5 or 6, no more. Now, I did some enormous learning during those last 2 years, but I probably could have learned even more if I had left. And so I think the first thing was being willing to walk away. Now, I got to do a full stop. To many of you, right, my 2 interviewers, to anybody who's listening, the idea of actually hesitating to leave a company sounds dumber than a stump. I want to acknowledge that. But in the year 1990, for a woman to leave a company where I was making good money and, while I wasn't on the fastest of tracks, I certainly was, nobody was saying you have to leave the company, okay? For me to have realized I needed to step aside was still a big deal. And so I did so, and that was my move to PepsiCo. And so I worked in their Pizza Hut subsidiary. This is back when PepsiCo owned the restaurant group, now known as Yum Brands. And that was a huge step for me, huge, on so many levels. But what it did, and what I think can be so powerful to be thinking about in terms of a career, is when you're forced to a different location, in a different world with different success factors, with different expectations. Every time you do that, your growth accelerates exponentially. And as much as I love hearing somebody who's gone through 30 or 40 years in a certain company, and my father retired from the Dow Chemical Company after 35 years, which is a pretty big deal, and he had fought World War II, so it's not like he came out at 18 kind of thing. I respect that, but I somehow knew that wasn't the path I needed to take. So I only spent about 3 years at Pepsi, and I moved to Coke. And then I spent just short of 5 years at Coke, and I moved to Definition 6, and I did that for only about a year. And so there's a willingness to read the signs of what's happening, to see what your fit is, and also to see what are you looking for in this experience, and and to know when to move on. And then I'll add a kind of charming moment in this. Um, I was at International Dairy Queen, and I was having a conversation with one of my suppliers. We were at a convention, so it was normal that I would run into her. Wonderful woman, still in touch with her, fabulous entrepreneur, love her to death. And she and I were talking about life changes out by the pool while everybody else was in a convention. It's as if I'm sitting with you at the pool now. And during my time at International Dairy Queen, I had also met my now husband. And I was thinking of leaving the International Dairy Queen. And one of the reasons I had joined International Dairy Queen, true story, absolutely true, is that it was an easier commute to my parents. I am an only child. I've lost both my parents now, but at the time they were beginning to be a bit more vulnerable. And I was their only real resource. They had a wonderful network of friends, but family steps in for family. And so they were direct flights from Minneapolis to Midland, Michigan. And I was living in Atlanta before that, and it's a long haul to get from Atlanta. You got to fly here and there and everywhere. So I said, one of the reasons I may want to work at International Dairy Queen is to do this. So I'm sitting at the pool. You're back at the pool with me, and you're enjoying the heat on your faces, and it's great. And this amazing woman, Mickey, said to me, "So let me see if I understand. You're hesitating to leave, but you joined the company because one of the things was you were closer to your parents. And then your mom had a terrible fall and sadly ended up passing away 6 weeks later. And you were able to be there quickly and yet get back to your work, and everything you had sensed might happen happened. And oh, by the way, you fell in love with an amazing man. Don't you think you're done now?" And it was the most sensible comment, right? It was somebody looking at the outside of, am I advancing? Am I getting paid enough? Where's my ego and all of this? You thought you needed to be someplace. The terrible thing happened. You were able to support your father. You were able to go through grief together. And in the middle of all of that, you found the man of your dreams, and I'm still married to him. Oh my God, aren't you done? Those are the moments when you look for signposts. That wasn't a signpost. It was a freaking, "Hello, I'm the band. I'm here to tell you that you're done." And 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 yet that moment is as if it happened yesterday. So it's about listening to people. It's about your heart and your mind being open to time to change. So that became a huge demarcation point. I got a little bit off of your topic, my apologies, on change, but I do think the reason I was able to advance was a willingness to put myself in uncomfortable situations and recognize the time for change.
Something that's on my mind is you've achieved a lot of success, I would deem so. We often glorify successes in our society, but we don't think about the costs they come with. What costs were there for you to achieve your successes?
There was probably a good 10-year period where I hardly worked out at all. I was working 12-hour days. Excuse me. And then needing to go home because I was single at the time, needing to go home, make your own dinner, fall into bed, start it all over again. And just the way I'm wired, which is not something that I would suggest anyone else to be wired this way, but it is the way I'm wired, is I just had this desire to, I don't know if it's so much go above and beyond, but I had to, at least on my terms, give my all. And so I didn't have good boundaries. So, I would still read email at night and whatnot. And so I don't think I was the healthiest during that time period, particularly at my most senior roles, where I found it the hardest to have those boundaries because I have and not always expressed perfectly, but I have a deep, deep concern and care for the people that work for me. And so that would be one thing. And I don't mean to be, flippant about this, but you've already heard someone who worked a lot of hours and didn't have good boundaries. I don't think it's a mystery that I was single until I was in my mid 40s. I just didn't have the capacity as someone who's an introvert, as someone who sometimes didn't feel like I fit in perfectly, sometimes because of my gender, sometimes just because of whatever was going on. It just didn't lend itself towards, now let's go party, or let's go do this, or let's go join a swim club so you'd meet other people. All of those avenues were there. They were clearly my choices to make. But for whatever reason, I didn't feel like there were viable choices on the path I was on. So, that means that I didn't end up having kids, which the good news is, for some people, that's what they live for, is to have children. Some people are, if life gives me children, then that's great. And some people are like, I never want children. And I was kind of in that middle group, right? I didn't ever dismiss it as part of my life, but I also recognized I had this amazing full life doing things that I thought were really cool, and getting experiences that I never anticipated I would get was good. But then at some point you do look in the rearview mirror and you realize, this is not a good time, right, for me to be thinking about this. And then there's biology that comes into play. And at some point, particularly for women, not a big deal for two gentlemen sitting across from me, there's a point at which you are not going to be a mother biologically at that point. So all choices that were made. I'm smiling. I'm happy, right? I came to a place that felt like a really good result, but I certainly don't believe that's always the best result for everyone. And you need to be cautious of that to make sure that there's balance. I look at, in general, the students that I teach now, and this is actually just more in the last 3 or 4 years, the willingness of students to create boundaries around their personal life is better than I've ever seen. And I've been teaching since 2010. And so I'm optimistic that some of the choices that students moving forward will be more balanced than the ones that, for better or worse, and this is as much my problem as anything, but I didn't feel like I had a lot of those choices to put those boundaries in place. So,
and thank you so much. As a tradition,
yeah,
we wanted to start asking our guests to leave a quote for the next one. But since you're the very first one, we scrambled and we found this Adam Grant quote.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on this? Good teachers are passionate about the topic, but great ones are passionate about their students.
Oh, 100% agree. And in fact, I've had several people who have had similar careers to mine, and they're like, okay, now I want to go do what you're doing. And my first question is usually, why? Not in a mean way, but why, right? This was always my planned second career. I never wanted a PhD. I don't want to be a researcher. I wanted to be in the classroom with students. And my definition of how I was going to get there was I was going to have this great career so I'd be able to hand it to a place like UBC and say, I've had all these amazing roles and all of these experiences and whatnot, and I would like to use all of this and all of the constructs that you have, and I would like to share my knowledge with others. That was my gig. And the question I have for others is often, are you doing it because you want to offer that, or do you want to do it because you want to make the next generation better? And mine was always about the next generation better. And so when I hear that quote, and I'm a huge Adam Grant fan, so, and you guys probably knew that, which is, so I know that quote quite well, is that it's so much about why are you motivated to do something, right? So anyway, there you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, good. All right.
Thank you for joining us on Coding Life. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Anne Stone and gained valuable insights from her journey.
We're committed to bring you more fascinating conversations with remarkable individuals, so stay tuned for more exciting episodes. Thanks for listening.